Welcome to the Legendary Upside podcast. My name is Pat Rain. You can find all of my content at legendaryupside.com. With me today, Daniel Racz. We're going to be talking the NFL draft, some of the movement in where we think these guys might go. Daniel, how's it going?
It's going good. Is there any week better than the opening 4 days to March Madness? Just like hopefully we get a Robert Morris upset as we record. So we'll find out when it's out for.
Yeah, for a little Friday afternoon podcast during March Madness. It's a nice time of year. Let's go ahead and start at the top of the draft and talk through the top three picks. This has been a really interesting top three this year because at first it looked like maybe a quarterback wouldn't go one, but you have three quarterback needy teams at the top. And so now that opinion is starting to change. It seems like Cam Ward is kind of becoming the consensus 101 to the Titans, who sit tight and take him. But it's possible the Giants managed to trade up. It looks like, as we sit here right now, that Aaron Rodgers is maybe going to go to the Steelers. And so the Giants would still then be desperately in need of a quarterback, some hope to sell the fan base and the owner. But maybe the price would be a little steep for them to get to one, given that the Titans don't have anything going on at quarterback right now either. And then Shedeur, is he in the mix? Not even just for the Giants if they don't get Ward, but at 2 for the Browns. There's been a lot of buzz. Todd McShay kind of banging the drum that Shedeur might be how the Browns go. I was listening to Mina Kimes and Ben Solak talking about that as a really strong possibility. So there seems to be like some buzz that Shedeur, who like 4 weeks ago was kind of being, he's in the 20s. Is he really the quarterback 2 over Jackson Dart? And now maybe he's the number 2 pick overall or 3 at worst is starting to be like kind of the new meta. So where are you at on how the top 3 play out?
Yes. So to give a little background on just the draft and how I've seen it from the jump, I initially was very skeptical a quarterback would go at even 1. I have a large position on there to be no quarterback at 1, on Abdul Carter at 60-1, on Travis Hunter at 5-1, though I do have Cam Ward at 8-1. He was the only quarterback that I thought was live to go 1. I think it is not a certainty, but like 75-80% that it's Ward at 1, with Rodgers more likely than not going to the Steelers. That really puts the urgency on either the Titans to take him or the Giants, who seemingly have interest in Ward, to trade up. So I think Ward is the correct chalk to be the first pick now. I've been deeply skeptical of Sanders to be like a top 5 or top 10 pick for the
real
entire
quick before
process.
we go to Sanders. Do you think that the Giants are in play to trade for Ward, or like, because it feels to me that the Titans went from I'll probably just take Carter to not only will they take Ward, but like they're not moving off the pick?
I think there's still a chance they move off the pick. I think that the Giants quarterback options, and it really doesn't make sense for Rodgers to go to the Giants if the Steelers offer of comparable money is on the table. So with that in mind, I think that the Giants' desperation for a quarterback that is generally accepted as not an egregious reach given positional value at the top of the draft, I think that it's tough to think Ward isn't the first pick. Not that it can't happen, but you have potentially 2 paths to Ward at 1 hitting, either with the Titans or a trade down to the Giants. Then at 2, I think it's FanDuel. Their odds at the second pick are Abdul Carter minus 130, Sanders plus 130, then Hunter at like plus 700. So they clearly, there's something there with Sanders. I don't buy it for a second. I think that roster isn't good enough. And everything we've heard for months has been that teams do not think Shedeur Sanders is a top half of the first round, maybe top first round talent. And again, Ward,
not top 10, I think is very fair.
Like in terms of just how teams grade players kind of without positional value, or with just a bit of positional value in their typical rankings. Is Daniel Jeremiah, I think, had Cam Ward in the 10 to 15 range, which is about where Kyler Murray went or was ranked when he went 1 in 2019. So that's, I think, relatively the lower bound for how a quarterback can be perceived, and a team with the quarterback need to still take them at 1. So I'm giving Ward enough the positional value boost and everything we've heard that he's live. Sanders, I don't think is close. Brugler said that teams think of him below Nix, below Penix generally. Brett Coleman, similar. People aren't raving about Shedeur Sanders as like being in the top 10 of teams' boards when you think about players without their position. So I think it is very tough when thinking like Occam's razor. What's the simplest thing? There are 2 blue chip players in this class at positions that matter. There's Travis Hunter and there's Abdul Carter. And I don't think that a team without extreme desperation pulls the trigger on a quarterback that's so much less higher, like that is thought of way less highly that early.
You're right. Right. Well, but the funny thing is, though, about this draft, one of the things that makes it so interesting is that you have two teams with extreme levels of desperation. Like the Browns, this contract with Deshaun Watson completely hamstrings them. A rookie quarterback getting that salary would unlock a lot of things from a roster building perspective. They also obviously just paid Myles Garrett. So like they're they're in a situation where you go like, man, how do we get out of this? And taking a quarterback at 2 and having him be good is one of the easiest ways where they could just completely reset everything, and all of a sudden the Browns look they got out of the jam. Of course, you got to pass on a blue chip pass rusher and take a quarterback that no one has rated as the number 2 player in the draft to do it. But like they are desperate, you know? And then if they do opt to take Carter, what do they do at quarterback? Are we talking Kirk Cousins? Are we talking them taking like Tyler Shuck in the second round? You know, it's like you could. I mean, honestly, I kind of like the idea of taking Carter and then rolling the dice on like a
Yeah.
Shuck. And I don't think that much of Shuck, but like scouts like the way he throws the ball, and you know you can get him in the second round. So if you're saying you need a rookie quarterback to get you out of the jam, I mean, maybe it's a Davis Mills type answer, but at least like you're not horrendous. You know, maybe he's. I mean, obviously you're hoping you hit on a Derek Carr or, you know, who else was? I was going to say Geno Smith, but he was a disaster until he wasn't. But you know, you hope that you get something a little bit better that can kind of, you know, give you a sort of what late career Kirk Cousins would give you, but with a little more hope for more as he develops. He's only a couple of years younger than Kirk Cousins, but still, you know, Tyler Shuck, he can dream on it a little more.
You get the rookie deal for 5 years with the option if it's in round one, and
If it's if they trade in the back end of round one,
yeah. So I think that's really in play for the Browns of taking, assuming they have Carter over Hunter, but even if they have Hunter, then making a move up late
Do
in
you
round
think
one.
they would take a Shuck or a Dart? I think will be gone. He won't be there, but like, and Shuck does seem to be the guy that the NFL seems to value as the quarterback for. But do you think that would be the path to maybe try to get back in the late first and take a Dart, or trade for like a Cousins or find some like true stopgap for this year? What do you think they would do if they don't take Shador?
Yeah, the Cousins scenario was a little complicated by the $10 million bonus, where now the like dynamics of a trade might be a little tougher for the receiving team. Of if they're taking on more cap, are they just sending less? But then it hurts their cap so much, and Cleveland's already in a pretty poor cap position. But I think that my like operating philosophy with Cleveland was initially that they'd want a very cheap deal with Kirk or potentially Russ to go in and be the presumptive starter. But Kirk wouldn't really want that until he can know that he's not going to a team that takes a quarterback in the early part of the first round, so he doesn't get panicked again in a like way that's way more
That
obvious
would
from
be
the
so
jump.
rough for him, man.
Yeah, like if he
Yeah,
got demanded, like raised hell, made sure he got cut, signed with the Browns, like 1 year veteran minimum deal because of the offsets, then boom at 2, they do take Sanders. So I think Kirk would want to avoid that. I think Russ probably just wants to like find a seat before the musical chairs run out. But I think there's enough possibility there with those two where if it's like, if we map it out, it's Ward at 1 to Tennessee, it's Aaron to Pittsburgh, and then you have Shadur, Kirk, and Russ for like Cleveland, New York, and maybe a mystery team, right? Just like one of those three goes somewhere else. So I think there are enough spots at the dance that Cleveland doesn't need to force the Sanders pick if they're comfortable. They don't need to force the Sanders at 2 pick if they're comfortable with one of Kirk or Russ, and then almost certainly then you have to take a day 2 quarterback or move up from day 2 to early or to late day 1 to try and give the fan base something and just a higher ceiling option than what you're getting from those old veterans who might provide the floor, but very difficult to imagine those high end outcomes. But I think that's the way more likely option. I think Cleveland is, maybe they feel they're super desperate and just will have to be like, if we take Sanders and show enough promise, our regime gets extended. But it seems like they think they have a longer leash than that, that if they get enough solid pieces on this roster, they don't need to like plant their flag on Sanders at 2. Because if they take Sanders at 2 and he flops, the regime is done. Yeah.
That's kind of how I think it's actually kind of risky for them. Now, maybe I don't know exactly where they stand in terms of the job security.
It's better than the Giants. It's better than the Giants.
Yeah. Yeah, Giants could be gone mid-season. I don't think that Andrew Berry would be gone mid-season, or that Stefanski would be. So
Stefanski
you're
would get traded, I think. I think that if the Browns decide to move on, another team is like, we'll give you a day two pick.
well. I mean
Easily.
that gives you that's massive job security right there. So I mean you're if you pass on Abdul Carter and he's awesome, and Shador's like even if we're not talking about he flames out, but like if he's just kind of like whatever, you know, then he's like a worse version of Tua,
You're
which I
Daniel
think is
Jonesy.
Daniel Jonesy. Yeah, you're getting some product, but it's like I don't think this is the long term answer. That's just a really really tough look for a front office that's supposed to be, all cutting edge or whatever. They're they're not exactly crushing it so far, and then that would just kind of cement it. So yeah, I think maybe just taking the best player available is safer, right? Because you're getting
It's
a blue chip edge rusher.
it's certainly more logical when you try and like break down all
Yeah,
the combinations of assets you can bring in with like your available cap, what's left of your cap dollars, the second pick, and then either your day two and day three picks are moving up into the later part of day one. There are two blue chip players besides Genty, but at running back, I don't think when you think about positional value, he comes close. Like Hunter and Abdul Carter are legitimate potential second contract players in current cap dollars of like 25 to $35 million. True
oh, for
impact
sure.
players that you're
I mean, by
getting a
the time it
massive,
gets there, it might be like 45 with the way the
yeah,
cap's going up.
you're
Yeah,
getting such huge potential surpluses on such strong hits. Like the odds of a miss
right.
on either of those players based on comparable like college level prospects is so low that I think that you take that player and then move on from there, whether that means moving up if you have a preferred quarterback. I think there's a chance Sanders still falls. Like at this point last year, Malik Willis was probably the odds on favorite to go at 2 to the Lions. I think Sanders is thought of more favorably than what we ended up knowing about Willis going in round 3. I'd be very surprised if Sanders made it out of round 1, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he makes it past the top 10 still. I think it's unlikely, but I'm still holding a candle for a Sanders fall if Ward goes at 1. But that brings us to the Giants, who are
That brings us to the Giants. Yeah.
they are
So if it's
so,
John Spytek, alternate universe, he's the Giants GM. The they cleaned house. They Spytek, Pete Carroll, Brady buys a stake in the Giants now instead of the Raiders. If it's a brand new GM, brand new regime, they're not taking Shador here, right? They're taking Travis Hunter
I think there are probably 5 players they take ahead of
or
Shador.
Carter.
It's not even a
Yeah.
consideration to if the information that the public has from every reputable scout and insider on how Sanders is thought of in the league, which is like a fringe round 1 talent that then you positional value adjust into the first round correctly, then no team with job security is taking that player at 2 or 3. The Giants not have job security, so I think that it is very reasonable that they at 3 take him. But when I look at that roster, the path to success is like Sanders has to play well or Sanders has to play really well or the team has to have a winning record to like try and make it as black and white as possible for them to keep their jobs. With this roster right now, they would have to have such rose colored glasses to think that taking Sanders at 3 gives them a good shot to extend it. I think what is more likely in terms of extending their life cycle by at least a year is taking Hunter or Carter, whoever falls, and then either trading up for a quarterback. Again, I think Sanders' fall out of the top 10 is live. And then maybe move your second round pick, maybe both third round picks, maybe a future day 2 pick to get up. And then you take Sanders if he's falling enough, or taking a different quarterback and then taking like Russ or Kirk. But the
Now,
desperation element makes it in play at 3 more so than the Browns, I think.
well, Sanders falling would be makes that move a lot more interesting because if Sanders could fall all the way, let's say to the Seahawks or to the Steelers, that takes away a team that might have drafted Jackson Dart, right? So they would take Sanders, let's say, and then Jackson Dart's still there. So if the Giants play is let's trade back into the first round and grab Jackson Dart or something, then if Sanders is really live to fall to the late teens or the 20s, that makes that play a lot more live. But is he? Would he get past the Saints at 9? Because the Saints are another team in cap hell. They're kind of in the Brown situation, but honestly, it's worse for them. They have Derek Carr who's going to play there this year. They redid his contract so that he'll definitely be on the team this year and probably on there next year, although they could cut him and then spread out a massive like $60 million cap hit out over like 4 years or something. But that makes more sense if you have Shedeur Sanders ready to take over, who sits a year behind Carr, comes in year 2 as your starter, and all of a sudden you have a light at the end of the tunnel from this salary cap hell that they put themselves in. They keep kicking the can down the road, and now they have a way out. So wouldn't the Saints just scoop him there, or you think he would fall past them?
I find it hard to believe that a coach who has done no wrong, and Kellen Moore being just hired has like a full clean slate, would want to hitch their wagon to a fringe round 1 quarterback taken in the top 10. I think that it is possible, given the GM and the desperation, if the owner's like, we need some excitement, that they would take Sanders. But I think that Moore would probably be against it unless he has a glowing eval of him, because you only get basically one shot at that rookie quarterback. If you miss it, you're getting fired once it's clear that quarterback is done, which almost always happens at the end of the second year. Sometimes they get a third with like Richardson and the Steichen regime. That's partially injury fueled. So I think that Moore taking Sanders means that the odds that he gets fired after 2026 are quite high, because Sanders would start 26 and probably start some of 25. If he's not ready, he's gone. Like Raheem Morris, I think if Penix doesn't show anything this year, he and Fontenot are gone.
Right.
And that would be, I mean, that's kind of the example of Fontenot. Unclear who wanted Penix there, because the Kirk signing happened early in free agency and Morris was fired really late in the process. So maybe he just really fell in love with Penix, and they had already signed Kirk seemingly because Blank said.
That's the read I got, is that Morris fell in love with Penix basically after they signed Kirk.
But that's the bed Morris like chose to make. If that doesn't work out this year, I think that, especially given that the GM was hired on a different timeline, they're both gone. I don't know if Moore wants to make that same bet. Again, Penix is kind of a decent comp based on how those prospects were thought of as players, not round 1.
Draft night, we weren't sure Penix was going to go first round.
Yeah.
I think we took the prop that he wouldn't on chip chasing.
And in previous years, all those like potential round 1 quarterbacks, Pickett did go round 1, but Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, and then who was it in other years? But there's always been those guys that, they're going to go round 1. Matt Corral.
Howell was talked about for a minute, and then he fell to the fifth.
But even the week,
Malik Willis,
the week into the draft, besides Bo Nix and Michael Penix last year, it's always like we pretend. Oh, Hendon Hooker, that's who it was. We're just there are these guys that we always raise, and in those mocks go anywhere from 10 to 32, and then fall because the NFL, when they don't have these glowing evals of quarterbacks, generally doesn't raise them. Penix and Nix were the exceptions to the rule. And I think the NFL was being played efficiently. Those guys would go earlier, given the positional value element. But generally, they haven't done that. So Sanders would be in line with the Nix and Penix, and I guess McCarthy as well, though he was thought of better, evals of, even if you don't have a huge need like the Falcons, you just take the quarterback, because Penix and Sanders are kind of that same type of player evaluation. And then if that valuation has just become you're a top 16 pick, even if the team doesn't necessarily have a need.
I think it would make a ton of sense for the Saints to take Sanders. And I'm not a huge Sanders guy, but I think that would be a good selection.
I think so as well. I'm just skeptical that Kellen Moore's sake, I think that the odds that he has like a 4-year tenure in New Orleans go down with the Sanders pick, because it starts his clock, and next year's quarterback class seems slightly better, and their roster is in no place to be good now. That if they're bad this year, like Brian Callahan didn't get fired after an abysmal year, the GM got fired, maybe the Saints do something similar, and then you take a quarterback next year. I think the LSU quarterback is thought of quite highly. Maybe that Arch Manning potentially. So I think that next year is more likely the Saints quarterback spot, but Sanders at 9 in play makes sense. Wouldn't fault it, but I don't think he's like an auto pick for the Saints.
What do you think the Giants ultimately do?
If Sanders is on the board, I'm 60-40 that it's Hunter over him. I think it would be like Carter, Hunter, Sanders. I am not extremely confident, and I know the market would probably have it Sanders, Carter, Hunter. So I'm less confident on that being the quarterback pick. But I think the Giants would be very likely to make a trade up after taking Hunter, because in terms of ways to sell the franchise, I think Hunter and Sanders as a combo makes a lot of sense. I think,
That would be fun.
yeah,
It's hard to pull off. I don't, because I think Sanders. It'd be hard to see how he gets past the Seahawks or the Steelers. Like
I think
you'd
they'd
have
move
to
up
trade up
before
pretty
then.
high. Yeah, yeah.
But you
But
pick
I
at
mean,
34 or 35, you have 2 third-round picks this year, you have all your picks next year. In terms of getting into the middle of round 1, I don't think it's that crazy after the top
okay,
10, especially in a class where the top talent dries up. But this is
that's
more like
true.
a,
It's seen as pretty flat after.
so if there's a team that wants more picks, I think the Giants would make sense, but we don't know. We have no true evidence that they love Sanders and hate Dart or have this drastic grade
Right.
drop off from QB2 to the rest. We've heard that it's QB1, like they really like Ward, but I don't even know how true that is relative to everyone else. But if they don't get Ward, it wouldn't shock me if they're like, will either take someone in the early second or move up in round 1 and pair with a true blue chip player.
So if the Patriots are sitting at 4 and Hunter and Carter off the board, I think they probably go like Armand Membu.
Yeah, was talking
But
to a friend who's a big Patriots fan, and I said my mock, like dynamic mock, depending on how the top 3 goes, is Membu's the 1, Hunter's the 2, depending on how it goes. Like they'd take Hunter if Hunter's there, but in my scenario where Hunter went 3, they take Membu. He said, I think it's maybe 60 Membu, 40 Campbell. We haven't heard word on the player the Patriots like, and even if they take an O lineman at 4, they still probably have the worst offensive line in football.
totally,
So they
totally.
I think Hunter is just too good of a prospect to put the positional need there. But
I tend to agree, but I also know that, from listening to Patriot stuff, because I'm so in on Drake May that I now listen to Patriot stuff from time to time. Um, I've long hated the Patriots. It's absolutely ruining me that this happened. But um, but I think they would love to trade down. So if you had Hunter, do you think they take Hunter, or do you think they're immediately shopping that pick?
I think they're hearing offers on the pick. But I think Hunter is a good enough prospect that they are not upset to take him. Just
I
without
agree.
everything we've heard about Hunter is this a blue chip player, potentially with blue chip grades on both sides for some teams.
No, it's
So I think
crazy. Yeah, yeah.
the lack of buzz on what he can do, I think, is a little surprising. I thought he was live to go at 1, and now it seems like that's just a dream. But I think they'd take him more likely than trade down if it's there at 4. But if a team gave like a Godfather offer for a non-quarterback, I think you
Hmm.
consider it, at least because of all the needs, especially along the line and at wide receiver.
Totally. All right, moving down into the Jaguars and the Raiders, and how do you see kind of the rest of, like, are you buying, like Davis has a whole theory that somehow the Jaguars are going to get Travis Hunter, which strikes me as, I guess the Patriots would have to pass on him, or they'd have to trade up with the Patriots. But um, we're probably, once we get into the outside the top 4, like we should see some edge players come off, um, some of the tackles. But we do have Genty as maybe a top 10 guy now. The Raiders at 6 is kind of the chalk spot. The Bears at 10. But Todd McShay in his latest mock, he had them taking a running back at 10. He had him taking Omari and Hampton because Genty was already off the board to the Raiders at 6. So how much you buying the running back buzz right now, that we could potentially have 2 running backs in the top 10 of this class? Is it, you buying that at all?
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't put it at 0% that if Genty goes at 6, which I think is not, gun to my head, way more likely Genty does not go at 6 than does. Still think he's probably the singular most likely player to go at 6 because there are too many offensive tackle things there. Though
Sure.
their right tackle DJ Glaze, like a day 2 investment that I don't think has been super strong, and Pete Carroll has like said some nice things about him. But in terms of pure, typically at the top of the draft, it's smarter to think about just how the aggregate of teams is going to rank players than fully penciling in for need. I think of
Mm,
the Seahawks a few years ago when their cornerback room was very strong right after the Tariq Woolen draft, and very few people thought that Devin Witherspoon was in play for them. And I think I had like plus 900 on the Seahawks first pick to be a corner there. So just Witherspoon was thought of as a top 8 pick almost universally, but few people connected him to the Seahawks because they were perceived to be set there. But in the early first round, teams are picking on talent more than they are filling.
Which they should be. And we always say, like, best player available, take the best player available. But then when you actually do the mocks, you're like, well, they don't need a cornerback. So
yeah, you have 6 more rounds and probably 5 to 8 more picks after the first round to fully get some assets of different investment level at the positions you want to address.
Yeah.
The Raiders would have to think so highly of Genty relative to the other more important positions. And we don't know who will have final cut. They hired Pete Carroll before they hired Spytek. We don't know much about Spytek, but in Tampa, they never took a running back that early in the past few years. Like Rashad White, late round 3 or mid round 3.
Ronald Jones was picked
early
34.
Day 3. So I'm not sold. Oh, 36. Oh, was Spytek there that early?
I don't know if Spytek was there, but that was Jason Light. I'm almost certain. So,
but
yeah, same regime.
Yeah. So yeah, obligatory Rojo shout out. So I'm skeptical that Genty is going to be this huge run to the podium pick for the Raiders, because though their offensive line is technically set, and a huge predictor of round 1 offensive line investment is continuity from year N-1. But I think that given how Membu and Campbell are thought of in NFL circles, especially Campbell for teams that don't have the arm length disqualifier, those 2 players are going to be really in play, starting with the Patriots, probably not with the Jaguars, but just in the top 10, including the Raiders. Genty makes a lot of sense there. I think it's more likely than not he falls to Chicago. I think Chicago is still the single most likely team to take him. The Raiders are probably the second. But if Hampton's on the board at 10 and Genty isn't, I think the Bears are probably taking a D lineman or offensive lineman. Braxton Jones in the final year of his rookie deal. Not sure if they want to extend him. And then I know they retooled the interior of their offensive line, but they have a tackle spot that they might be looking 1 year in advance, as most teams do when they're planning out assets. So I think that if it's not Genty, I would be very surprised with what we know of Hampton to see him go 10. But I do think he's a round 1 pick quite confidently at this point.
Yeah, and he was round 2 in the beginning of the process. He was like the running back 2, but round 2. And now it does seem like he's round 1. So you're buying, like, what do you think his floor is?
I think somewhere. Yeah, I still think there's a chance he falls out of round 1, because after the Broncos, who are clear, if he's on the board, he's in consideration given need
for sure
and potential fit. After that, like maybe the Chargers and the Steelers repeat the Najee experiment, which I really think they won't do, given how strong Warren's been, like the return there, and how they will remember the Najee Harris first round pick just more than most teams and possibly weigh that. But I think that it's tough to then find the team after pick 22 in the Chargers and Steelers. I think that the team is probably there still. If he's on the board after 23, I think it's more likely he goes before the end of night 1, but it wouldn't be a guarantee. But those early day 2 teams are also great fits in terms of how fantasy value would be perceived.
Well, there you look at like the Raiders again, like
it's the Raiders, the Bears now twice because they have the Panthers pick. So I think the Bears also, knowing they have 2 second round picks, I would assume they like Henderson, Hampton, maybe Judkins, maybe Caleb Johnson enough. I think we will get 1 passable back here. So I wouldn't think that them forcing the Hampton pick at 10 would be surprising. I was surprised when the Lions, I would have said force Gibbs at 12 there that year. And look who has egg on their face now. So maybe that if Ben Johnson thinks a running back can really help his offense, I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But from what I'm seeing on Hampton, which is also what I was seeing on Gibbs about this time of year, where Gibbs was probably an early round 2, maybe a late round 1. And then we're getting a lot of buzz at the end that he was like the week of the draft, he's a lock for round 1. Going to go very
some
early.
People have him over Bijan kind of stuff, like the same way. And I was like, wait, what? And that's how I feel even more so, actually. Like, I think Gibbs was closer to Bijan than
Gibbs was,
is to Genty in terms of the quality of the prospect. What do you think Genty's floor is? Do you like the Raiders pass on him? Where does he go?
I'd be very surprised if the Bears let him go through, but I think there's still a chance, like non-zero, probably 10,
Cowboys?
20%. Cowboys are in terms of the outcomes where he's not a Bear, not taken by the time the Bears pick at 10, which is probably 10 to 20%. I think the Cowboys are then over half of the outcomes after that.
Wow. Okay.
But
And
I think, again, that's maybe like
the
5-10% of
Broncos?
it.
Could he get to the
Yeah,
Broncos?
a Broncos trade up. If he makes it to the Broncos, I would be truly shocked if
He
they let
was being
him
mocked to the
slide, unless,
Broncos at a couple weeks ago. You were seeing that a little bit. It seems like maybe the running
yeah,
backs have moved up
it's
slightly.
more that everyone else has moved down. Like initially, I thought when
Hmm.
the Genty market first dropped, I tweeted, like I was talking with Jacob Sanderson. I was like, I think Chicago and the Broncos are the best bets, like plus 500 each. And he talked me out of the Broncos, just being like, there's no way. The odds that he's there are so low, even if the confidence that they take him if he's there are high. So I think the Bears are like the perfect sweet spot of in a class where there are so few blue chip talents or close to blue chips at the high value positions. Genty then comes into play for teams right after Hunter and Carter go off the board, which is why the Raiders, like just penciling in Pete Carroll invests in the running back position. They're going to want to run the ball. Chip Kelly's brought
Yeah.
on as OC, which is why 6 is like, I understand the chalk from a mock draft point, but I think 10 is still more likely. I think that there are other needs. Maybe they reach on a corner if we like, it might not even be a reach if we start hearing more positive buzz on Will Johnson or Jedi Barron, but we will see. I think that like the Raiders and Bears are correctly the most likely teams. Cowboys are in play, and maybe a team then moving up after that.
And then as we get to like round 2-ish, like do you think let's say the Bears take Genty, Hampton goes to the Broncos. So there's 2 running backs off the board in like the first 20 picks. Is Henderson live to go round 1?
Yeah,
Are we talking about 3? Is Judkins like could we get 3 running backs in round 1?
I would be surprised, but it is not. It's probably 30%, maybe 20% that we get those 3 because Genty, barring like even worse than a Laramie Tunsil type draft night video, is like
Right.
99.9%. I think
He's
Hampton's
going
probably
first round, yeah.
75+% to go round 1. Then maybe it's Henderson and like a sliver of a Clyde Edwards-Helaire level chance that it's Judkins or Johnson. So I think
Sure, yeah.
that I would be surprised if it's
I think the
Henderson.
CEH would actually be Scattaboo. That would be like the whoa.
We just get like
I
a
thought he was going
Josh
round
Allen,
3.
Brandon Bean saying like Josh Allen was texting me. I love how this dude plays the game.
Yeah, I'm in. I mean, I'm fully in. I'll draft him. He's the 101 in Superflex now. No, I'm kidding. Still Genty. But yeah, I mean that crop is interesting because it feels like Henderson and Judkins have really solidified themselves as at least kind of in the early to mid round 2, like top 50 picks. I expect both guys to go top 50. But does it feel like Johnson is sliding? He seems like he could easily go round 3.
The combine stuff wasn't great. Talking about how he'd run the 4.4s, then ran what 4.58.
I think so, and then not a great 10-yard split either.
So I think that Johnson's range, besides like the CEH or that type of reach, is mid to early round 2 at like the 95th percentile for the nut outcome, and then I think it's probably day 3, like the end of day 2, round 3 is like the downside case, and then maybe 5% of outcomes are in round 4 or later. I think Dylan Sampson's upside case is probably pick 55. I think that's in play the way.
Okay.
But that's like, again, the 95th percentile. So just trying to think there. But I think
let me ask. So okay, the 4 guys, Genty, Hampton, Henderson, Judkins, we expect to go round 2. Caleb Johnson and Scattaboo are live to go round 2. Would you disagree with kind of that assessment?
No, I think they're live.
The 4, and then those 2 are live.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
Who else is alive to go round 2?
I think it's
Sampson. Is there anyone else?
I mean, anyone's technically live. I would say no one like 5% of the time or more. Okay. So I think that Brugler on the recent pod he did with Robert Mays was talking about how some teams are going to have Sampson. I know Brugler had like Jordan James in his top 70. I don't think James is really a round 2 player, but possibly round 3. But then round 3, like we've seen a lot of shocking running back picks. Like Darrington Evans was a round 3 pick a few years ago. I'm just like once we get to round 3, I think we could see 1 to 2 names. Yeah, the deviation of so many guys, 95th percentile, is after like pick 75, but getting in the top 64, I think, is a
Can I
little.
throw a name out there?
Yeah,
Would it pick 63? RJ Harvey. Could you see it?
maybe 1-2% of the time. So I haven't seen too much round two Harvey stuff, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it has escaped me. But I think that there's going to be 1 to 3 surprisey backs. Like the expected draft position was round 4, somewhere around there, that jump into early to mid round 3.
I haven't heard anything, and
we could be the one starting.
Not that I would. We could be the one. Yeah, this is trace this back to give us credit when this becomes a thing. But the reason I threw him out specifically is that he really feels like the type of running back that a team could fall in love with. That he's got the receiving, but he also is a really consistent runner. He's undersized, but he can be used as he's 205. He's 5'8", but he's 205. So you could talk yourself into him as like, no. Like this is a real running back, very strong success rate, handled a lot of work, great breakaway yards, broke tackles, good elusive rating, versatile as a receiver. He's like the obvious red flag of, he's 5'8" and undersized. Maybe he's kind of more of a rotational back, the type of guy we would expect to go more like round 4, round 5. But he's really, really fun to watch. He's really fun to watch. I could see a team falling in love a little bit and being like, we're not risking it. We're not risking it. We're supposed to wait.
Kyle
this
Shanahan,
is a deep class.
Just at Kyle Shanahan, pick 43. He like has picked 75 and 100 in hand. He's like, I can't let this fall.
What about the Packers? He maybe doesn't clear the height thresholds, but like they wanted the Marshawn Lloyd. This is the Marshawn Lloyd.
I think they give Marshawn
replacement.
Lloyd. I think they're giving Marshawn Lloyd another year. He wasn't so atrocious.
They need their new Aaron Jones. I think no, you're right. Any specific team. I mean, this is already kind of a crazy prediction to begin with, and any specific team I tie it to makes it all that much less likely. But
yeah,
he's like one of the guys that I'm kind of curious about being one of the surprise. Like he would be my pick as the surprise. Late round 2 guy going earlier than you think. Another guy.
Would Houston make sense as fit? I mean, they have 58, they have 79, and
that would make a ton of sense.
89, so 3 picks in that 32 pick range. I think they're a huge sneaky running back spot. Mixon's probably a coin flip at best to be on the roster next year and in this class. Like, I think that's one. Like, I wrote the article still on Legendary Upside about the teams with running back investment. Like, the Texans didn't do anything in free agency. This running back room is basically the same, right? Like,
yeah.
What's stopping them from, after trading Tunsil, getting another day 2 pick, from adding to a position? Did they need more help? So
I like it.
Yeah.
Once you get to that class, once you get to that part of the class at running back, really to me, it's about which of these guys, because I tend to agree. I don't think outside of Scadaboo and Johnson, maybe Sampson, these guys are really live for round 2. But who gets into round 3 and then who falls beyond that? It doesn't maybe matter so much if it's like we have DJ Giddens come off at pick 90 and then Damian Martinez comes off at pick like 110. Like, do we really care? But if you don't go day 2, late round 3, let's say, there's risk that you kind of keep sliding because it is deep. But who is kind of generally like? Are there any backs generally in this tier? And the tier I'm talking about, it's like Harvey, Giddens, Bashal Tutin, Damian Martinez, Devin Neal, Brashard Smith, Jordan James. Sometimes you'll hear Marcus Yarns thrown out there. Sometimes you'll hear Trevor Etienne in that tier. Sometimes you'll hear LaQuint Allen, Jaden Blue. Are there any of those guys that you think, Rocket Sanders maybe, Ollie Gordon maybe? Like, who of those guys is the riskiest from a draft capital perspective? Who could actually be like a 6th round pick? Like,
I think the ones
scare you there?
The ones you threw in at the end, I think obviously are the most fragile, given that their ranges are lower. And then let me just try and check, because a few years ago, I really thought Dwayne McBride was live for round 3 draft capital.
Right.
And
he goes, round 7?
I was checking if he was round 7 or undrafted. So
He was drafted.
he was pick 222. So I think that
Yeah.
in terms of players that I was confident would get decent, or probably more common than it should have been, but still reasonably confident they were getting round 3 to round 5 draft capital. I feel like I'm getting bad vibes from Devin Neal. Again, a player I've enjoyed drafting. It's more vibes based than anything, because it's very tough. The visits aren't really that indicative, and we don't get that much information, but a slightly disappointing combine and just not hearing that anything really boosted his stock when I thought he could have been live for round 3. I think that his range on the lower bound is wide. I'm not sure that I think our rank factors that in. So it's nothing too crazy, but I'm just like a little bit hesitant of, could this be the rug pull, given that there's typically one that I fall for every year. But I think it's still a fine risk adjusted bet. And there's so much uncertainty once we get past, like,
That one makes a
Caleb
lot of sense. He's a good tape guy, but didn't have the best combine. It's a deep class. It gets lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Yeah. So I think it's tough to prognosticate that one, because every running back has a little bit of that risk after Judkins at this point. Though I feel very confident. If it was Caleb Johnson, that would be the true who saw this coming. But
For sure.
because I don't see that coming. Like, even now, it's like, if he went early round 4, I'd be like, wow, that's a slide. But does he get lower than that? I really don't see it.
I was wondering if Scadaboo was maybe gonna have a slide, but it seems like, after the combine, he does the jumps really well, but doesn't run. And man, like a 4.65 40 would have honestly eased some concerns. Like, I think the bar is pretty low. I'm waiting 4.5 40. He might be a second round pick, lock it in kind of thing. But it doesn't seem like there's buzz on him sliding now. He still seems to be solidly in the top 100 of various rankers and stuff. So he's not so much someone I'm worried about. I think maybe the widest range of any of these guys is Bashal Tutin. Like, I could see him going pick 70. I could see him going pick 170. Like, the post combine hype on him was like a little more muted, not from the fantasy circles. We're now taking him in the 12th round, but the NFL's opinion of him doesn't seem to have shifted in like a huge way. It's always difficult with, these guys around kind of the top 100 borderline to get a real good sense. But I guess I'm sort of surprised that he's still in the top 100 borderline. I thought maybe he would have jumped into like, oh yeah, now I've got him ranked 75 or something.
Yeah, the fact that after such a strong combine, it didn't make that momentous jump into anyone being like, hey, fringe round 2 pick Bashal Tutin, or 210, I think is how we're supposed to pronounce it.
That might be part of the problem.
Yeah. A lot of great names in this running back class, though.
There are.
There's just
Quinshon Judkins, great name.
I think Omarion Hampton might be my one.
Omarion Hampton, sneaky good name. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Ashton Genty, we're kind of used to now, but it's a great name.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan Taylor's this class, thankfully. Like Caleb Johnson. Maybe that's why he's also falling.
Honestly, Devin Neal, not so great. Not such a great name.
We'll need to look further back in history to see the predictive power of the frequency of your first and last name appearing among the general American population and then falling in draft capital post combine. But I think that this class has so many guys that one of them's probably gonna fall, and Tutin not getting huge steam after a really strong combine is not good. It doesn't mean it's bad. Like, the range of, he's now a round 2 pick after such a strong combine probably should have been in play, of at least people talking about, hey, there are some teams that are just enamored with the athleticism here that I don't think ever happened or materialized. So we'll see what happens. Wouldn't shock me if he's still a decent round 3 pick, but floor is somewhere.
Like, Todd McShay still has Jordan James ranked ahead of Bashal Tutin. That's a little concerning to me, given the combine performances.
Yeah.
Not to say that Tutin won't go ahead, or that Tutin won't be a better pro, or that we should take Jordan James ahead of Bashal Tutin in fantasy. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, are we out over our skis a little bit on his draft capital? Because I think we all got excited after the combine. It was like, oh, this guy's a lot. Not only does he have upside, but he's safer than he was before. And that's sort of that safety part of it that I'm not sure is really materializing the way I hoped.
Yeah, that's a good shout on the fragility. We thought would have stabilized given the combine performance, but The scout that watches Jordan James and likes that player more than Bashal Tutin after Tutin's combine performance probably isn't moved by Jordan James having a suboptimal combine performance. They're watching it
True.
and like he runs hard, like the success rate, things of that nature. They're not really dinging
Yes.
him for the inability to run 10 plus yards.
Yeah, that showed up on tape the whole time with Jordan James. So if you're into Jordan James, a bad combine
Yeah.
probably didn't change your perception of who he is, which is always. I mean, the combine is talked about as a cross-checking exercise for these teams. They already have opinions of how fast these guys are, and that's honestly one of the reasons where 210 is maybe not moving the needle for guys. Is maybe he was seen as like an undersized speedster, and then he tests as a speedster, and I don't know. It's just something I'm keeping an eye on. Still totally willing to draft him where he's going because I was digging into his profile more, and it's like, man, I like this profile even more than I thought. Like he was awesome. Breakaway percentage, awesome. Breakaway yards per game, good. Elusive rating, awesome. Elusiveness per game, good. And so what I'm saying there's per touch, explosive, also able to handle a good amount of touches per game. Backfield dominated rating, excellent at Virginia Tech. Started his career at NC North Carolina A&T, goes to Virginia Tech and takes over the backfield by the end. 94% backfield dominated rating to close out, which is the highest mark in the class. So this idea that he's just kind of this undersized committee guy, maybe that's not correct. Maybe he's actually like probably in the NFL, he's going to be like 65% of the snaps, maybe 70, not like 90. But he could be like a legit 1A type guy. And he is also versatile, 1.27 yards per route run on 15 routes per game, which is a pretty healthy amount. So I'm like, man, I actually really like this profile. And I think the ceiling now is really high because he could go third round. But I kind of want to be all the way excited, and just I would need to hear like a little bit more buzz from the NFL guys to kind of get super, super pumped. So yeah, wide range of outcomes on him. Anything on Damian Martinez? He seems like a guy who the NFL has kind of quietly been in on this whole time. Sort of the correct way to play Ollie Gordon was just to take Damian Martinez, who's like the same archetype, but will actually get drafted high.
I mean, emphasis on quietly because I just have not seen that much on the other running backs. Again, trying to prognosticate the day 3 draft capital or possibly like late round 3 is really tough unless you think like your scouting grades or some scouts. So if anyone has the scouts that I think have a good correlation, please just tag me on Twitter and I'll incorporate it into my process. I think that just in terms of playing in best ball, you shouldn't, when the draft capital is uncertain, some of the biggest errors I've made in pre-draft contests are attaching any certainty there. Like A.T. Perry, Tyler Scott, Dwayne McBride, just some of my biggest pre-draft ADP misses were players where I thought there was more of a draft capital floor than there was. So the amount of risk you should be willing to take on when the loss like is major. If these guys go undrafted around 7, I think it is a much very severe. And I don't think you're getting any going into the top 75. I mean, Dameon Pierce would be the one example of a player. Like, though for most of the cycle, he was like pick 120 to 140 after he was drafted in the 4th. And then if you were just buying with the information that he was probably the week 1 mix to become the starter with Houston, and then he got up to like the 70s. So there's always room to correct right after the draft if you are a little underweight. And I think just not getting too over your skis on those fragile draft capital projections because it's really tough to predict.
That's a good. And I would say you spreading out your bets is one way to do that in this deep class. Like there's lots of guys. I do buy that this class is seen as deep. There's people are talking about there's this expected run. Where that run happens, no one knows. It could be later. It could be like round 4 and 5 that we see a ton of these guys come off. It could be round 3, but I do think that we are going to see a ton of these guys come off. And so, if you're into Damian Martinez, maybe also try to take some Trevor Etienne and some Clint Allen and some Ollie Gordon. I mean, Ollie Gordon has fallen now to where I actually am drafting him some.
Yeah.
He scares me. Like I think he could legit be a UDFA, but there's also a chance he's an early 4th round pick. Rashard Smith, another guy to make sure you're mixing in.
A lot of the appeal of just drafting overweight positions in the aggregate on this cohort of running backs is there are a lot of landing spots where you will, if that running back is not deficient, they will have the opportunity to work in, steal a few carries early, and possibly become a heavy rotation piece, possibly a starter late if they're round 3 to somewhere in day 3.
Selected. A Dameon Pierce type of talent can make noise in a number of backfields.
Like probably half the backfields by the end.
We could have a Michael Carter this year.
We could have 8. I mean, I guess not 8 because there are going to be some that are early drafted, but in terms of those late ADP players, that we could have 4 to 8 of those. I actually do think that are drafted outside the first 2 rounds. So if we include those round 3 players.
Yeah, but we just, I think it's a great call to be like, the answer is probably not to have like 40% Damian Martinez.
Yeah,
I do like him, but
I don't feel confident enough in any one player outside of those guys that are seemingly locks to be round 1 or 2 picks to be like, the flag I'm planting is that this is the running back to take to leverage how many are going to get drafted and have landing spots. The leverage, like the flag to plan is just like you distribute your one massive flag into like 8 smaller flags of like 12 to 20% on a bunch of these guys. Like I'm finding 2 to 4 winners among this 4 to 7 bet cohort, at least in terms of ADP value, and hopefully the talent also hits.
Yeah, because then of course one of the guys who hits massively will totally flame out as an actual NFL player, and a couple of the guys who will look blocked will be awesome. So I think spreading it out is just clearly the way to go. I would shout out DJ Giddens, RJ Harvey as guys who I think are still, like, I think those are pretty similar bets now to Devin Neal, and Devin Neal's going way ahead of them, especially on DraftKings. So, or I guess I should say those guys are, Harvey and Giddens are especially cheap on DraftKings. But yeah, I mean, I still think Jordan James is draftable, Brashard Smith, Marcus Yarns. Do you think he's in the draftable conversation now? No? Okay. Well,
yes, but like with maybe one asterisk. But again, like initially on the Jordan James front, it's like you, me. Well, just I think a little bit less draftable than the rest of the guys. So like exercise caution. Like it's like the
exercise caution.
It's like the spicier pick on the menu. But like initially, I agree. Cooled off on the Jordan James love. Yeah, with Jordan James, it was like me, you, Kyle, and Sack all read the same athletic piece, and they're like all whispering, "You see this Jordan James rating? We gotta like get him up to 180, brother." And we did that for like a week, and then we're just like, well, we're not that confident that this one thing is correct. So we like cooled off and like, yeah, he's probably a good bet, especially when factoring how little the market has moved based on actionable information. But the bet isn't like Jordan James. 40% Jordan James will be the skeleton key to pre-draft best ball. It's just this is a player with a nice overweight stance. There are a lot of others like that too. So just spread out your options. Don't like come out of the pre-draft best ball contest being like Jordan James will make or break 30%.
100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about James is like it's all just, hey, I think this guy could still go 3rd round. He's not like one of my favorite guys from a prospect perspective. But Yarns, I think like if he had draft capital attached, if he was like a 3rd round pick, I'd be a pretty big fan. I think he's probably like a 6th round pick, but I think he's getting to the point where as I aim to spread out my bets, I'm starting to like be okay to mix him in the 20th. He's kind of in the LaQuint Allen bucket for me where I'm like, I'll mix him in, Trevor Etienne, Jaden Blue. Like I'll throw some 20th round darts as part of the effort to keep these bets spread out like we talked about. All right, let's go to receiver. Let's talk about Matthew Golden. Back at the top of the draft, we've got Genty off the board to the Bears. Cowboys deciding between Amari Hampton and Matthew Golden and Tet McMillan. Who are they taking?
Amari Hampton, Tet McMillan, Matthew Golden. Jerry Jones is not watching. I don't know how much reach Jerry Jones's like cable package has, which is like based on how they attract players, we will see. But the key indicator with the Cowboys is like who do they have a top 30 visit with? Their 1st round picks are top 30 visits more often than I think any other team. So I would be looking out for that. I think that it would be a wide receiver instead of Hampton. I think it might even be a wide receiver over Genty. This team, since the Zeke pick and contract fiasco, has not invested in running back. They like signed Zeke and ran back Rico Dowdle last year and were like happy about it. This year, they like gave Javonte Williams 90% of the Rico Dowdle deal and then Miles Sanders the veteran salary benefit. This is a team that I think incorrectly, like they've arrived at the answer to the test that we would have arrived at 3 years ago, but I think for worse reasons because like they saw what they did with Zeke and I was like, we need to do the polar opposite of that. So I'm not sure they like get points on process,
And
but it seems
also
like
they're misunderstanding kind of the point that like running back's replaceable, but you don't like have to make sure that you have like nothing invested. Like
yeah,
you're like allowed like you're allowed to sign Najee Harris for the deal that the Chargers gave. That's fine.
yeah, round
Go to
four,
that.
even a round 3 pick when the roster's good, absolutely on the table. And I think this
Sure.
year that still will be in play because Javonte, like Miles Sanders is completely not a lock to be on the roster. Javonte's contract is close to nothing. It's the Rico Dowdle of last year, but we were more confident with Rico as a talent going into last year than we are with Javonte now. So I think that even though they have a
That's a
glaring
bummer.
need, yeah, they still need a wide receiver too. Like even though there's a great graphic of like team commitment to their top 2 wide receivers by total dollars, and it's like Jason Higgins, Tyreek and Waddle, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and then just the CeeDee Lamb contract and the $6 million Devontae Turpin has, where it's like the after Kobe Bryant dropped 81 points, Kwame Brown's like, didn't you just see me and Kobe dropped 82? So they clearly need another wide receiver. I think I for a while was a little skeptical of the Golden Rise, awesome combine, and now it seems cemented where 12 is probably the ceiling, but it's a live ceiling. And I think the floor is somewhere in those 20s. Like, this is a round 1 player. Tet's a round 1 player. I think Tet, if you told me a receiver went in the top 10, I think it's more likely Tet than Golden, but I'm not that confident. I'm not confident there's a receiver in the top 10. I think Tet's floor is probably close to
So
Golden.
if Tet goes in the top 10, who's he going to? Like, do you think he can go to the Panthers? I've been hearing kind of edge to the Panthers. Do you think he's live there?
I think
would he be live
edge
to the
or
Jags or
yeah?
like the Patriots don't seem live to take him.
I don't
now.
think the no, I don't think the
Like, that's all too
Patriots.
high.
The Jags at 5 strike me as rich. I mean,
Yeah.
depending on classification, I think Jalen Walker is technically a linebacker. So for anyone looking to like bet first position markets, edge and linebacker for a lot of those teams where Walker's live, that's just a note. But I think they're looking at like Jalen Walker, maybe Mykel Williams. I think that's early. Shamar Stewart, though Stewart and Williams, I think could go as late as like the end of the first round. So it's really unclear there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think the Jets, I think Tet would make sense, but what I'm seeing is it's Membu or Warren most likely. Fantasy Law Guy's also on that, and he's just a great NFL Draft Twitter follow for anyone looking at a resource. Also, is a great free website that I'd want to mention. Then after that, I think the Panthers and Saints, the Brandon Cook signing makes, I think, wide receiver round 1 a little less likely. And then I think we're looking at the Bears are not. The Niners are a Tet team. I think the Cowboys make sense. Like the internet good? Or
you're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, I think the Cowboys make sense.
Yeah, the Cowboys make a lot of sense.
The Cowboys are the likely ceiling. Yeah.
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 Likely ceiling, but also
they need
like
offensive linemen. They need a lot of things. They do not really invest in free agency. So I'm curious to see how they play round 1.
Yeah. So, okay, let's say Golden doesn't go to the Cowboys. Does he go like would the Chargers snap him up? Like who makes sense? Because when we were doing a ship chasing mock draft, and one of the things that that we kind of came to a consensus on is that although we like Tet more, that NFL teams probably have an easier time talking themselves into Golden, who's the speedy outside guy. He gets separation. If you're watching, Daniel will be back. He said he's going to reload. But, Tet is more of like a target hog. And so if you have like a CeeDee Lamb, I'm not sure that he makes as much sense as a Golden. Like, I would still take Tet if I were in their shoes, because I think Tet's a much better receiver prospect than Golden. But I get it from an NFL perspective. You're like, hey, what we need is someone to help open up targets for like Ladd McConkey. We don't need another intermediate target earner. And so I think that maybe helps Golden when teams are like thinking about the roles and maybe getting away from who's more likely to be good.
I think that I'd still think more teams than not are taking Tet over Golden if given the
Okay.
choice, but I don't think it's as universal as I would have thought a month ago. The Chargers are one where it makes sense. I think if Loveland makes it there, he's really live. Though my read on Loveland's range is that would be far lower on the like draft capital landing spot than the median.
Where
So
do you think he goes?
I think the Colts make a ton of sense as a tight end team. I think
That'd be a bummer.
Warren, yeah, like it's tough because the Jets were in on Bowers a bit last year, but not enough to take him. Yeah, because they went Fashanu at 11, then Bowers went 12, if my memory serves me correctly.
That sounds right.
Yeah, because they had 10. The Vikings traded 11 to 10 for JJ. Yeah. So, and then Bowers went 12 or 13 to Vegas. So I think that looking at the pattern matching with the tight end, given their team needs, Warren makes sense for the Jets, though. I think, again, he's maybe only the most likely in a plurality because maybe it's Membu, maybe it's Campbell, maybe. I think Shadur is really unlikely, but not a true zero. So I think we're seeing the tight ends having. I don't think Loveland goes ahead of Warren as much as I might have wanted that to happen early. So I think
I don't
Warren's like
either.
7 to 14 in probably 80% of scenarios, but there's still some where it's lower. I think Loveland's probably earlier in the double digits at the ceiling. I think the Colts are just a strong tight end team, especially on mock drafts where it's tough of might they want a safety, but are we sure which one? Are we sure they're set at corner even after the Cam Bynum ad? No, or not. And I think Travis Ward as well. So I think that the Colts are a tough team to mock for, but tight end makes so much sense given their needs. Both Warren and Loveland I've seen getting some spots there. I think the Broncos aren't out of play to take a tight end, though the like Loveland overlap with Ingram makes it a little less likely. I think if Loveland's there at 20 with the Chargers, they take him.
They take him,
more,
yeah.
more likely than any other player. But would they move up for him? Like Harbaugh would have to think so highly of him from his time at Michigan. Though I don't think that's fully out of the realm of possibility, given that they really would like a secondary target in the passing game.
That makes sense. So where do you think Tet's floor is? Because it sounds like what I'm hearing is he's got a wide range of outcomes where he's still live to maybe go to the Panthers at 8 or go, maybe not so much the Saints, although I think they still might do it. But he could, he could go top 10 still.
Yeah, it is.
But how late could he fall?
It's tough because when you look at every team, like the Niners, almost certainly not. But after the Cowboys, the Dolphins, the Colts, the Saints, or the Falcons don't make much sense. The Cardinals seem like you'd be a little redundant. The Bengals,
Yeah.
absolutely not. The Seahawks, I don't see it. Tampa Bay, probably not. Maybe Denver, but then you get to Pittsburgh, who just traded for DK Metcalf. So then you have the Chargers, which make a lot of sense. Do the Packers finally take a wide receiver in round 1? The Vikings at 24 are probably trading down because they only have 4 picks this draft. The Texans are almost certainly an offensive lineman, though a second key target in the passing game certainly makes sense. Then you get to the Rams, who just signed Devontae Adams. So I think it's going to be a team that just has a good grade on him that we might not see coming unless it's a team, the Cowboys or earlier like the Panthers, or if it's then the Chargers. Because besides that, no team has a concrete need for that type of player. But if they have him graded as a top 8 player before positional value adjustments or top 10, it's going to be tough for him to fall out of the mid 20s and possibly trade up.
Yeah, it does make things a little scary because if he falls past where he should go based on kind of how he's graded, he falls to a team that's like, oh my God, we didn't expect him to be here, but he's the highest guy on our board by a lot. Let's just take him.
Like
those are
the Ravens
almost bad landing
probably
spots.
That team,
yeah, Ravens, right? That'd be terrible from a can he consolidate targets? How many targets are there to consolidate? Perspective. Cardinals.
I think the Commanders have other needs, but that
actually would be pretty fun.
The Cardinals don't. What?
If he went to the Commanders.
The Cardinals or Commanders?
Commanders would be fun. Because you'd have him consolidate. I mean,
ADP
Terry's,
would have.
Good.
His ADP would have to drop, I think, before like week 1. No.
Yeah, probably drop. Terry's would drop.
Yeah,
but but Ertz's would drop too. Like I think you have him being the kind of the targeted dominant wide receiver 1 down the stretch. with, really strong quarterback play, upside. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe
I
for
mean,
best
that would
ball
be
would hurt him,
like,
but for dynasty, I think we'd be like, oh my god, he's the Jaden Daniels long-term number one.
mhm. But in redraft, it would be like the outcome of when the Texans took or trade for Steph Diggs. And like Nico fell from early second to 2-3 turn. Dell fell 2-3 turn to 3-4 turn. Stroud went up like 15 picks at the start. So maybe there's
Yeah,
something like that that's going to happen.
something like that. Yeah, yeah, it would hurt him a little bit in best ball for sure. But yeah, I mean, he the Seahawks were the other two where you're like, I don't see that. Well, they could use an outside wide receiver. That would scare me a bit because you're like, oh no, are you like an X doing like, are you the new DK Metcalf? Because he's not DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
He's not Mike Evans. He's more like Drake London. He's more like a kind of Chris Godwin or something to me. Like, I don't want him to be. It's kind of what happened to Keon Coleman, where they're like, great, you're perfect as like a downfield X. And that's like actually what he's probably worst at. He's just big. So, I mean, Keon Coleman. Tet would be better in that role, but he's not. And he certainly could play outside, but you want him to be used in the more intermediate area. And him and JSM would not be the type of. It wouldn't be how I would build my wide receiver room. But the further he falls, the riskier it gets with him landing in a spot where a team would maybe even agree that this isn't like a perfectly, these skill sets don't perfectly complement each other, but it's like, this dude's awesome and he shouldn't be here, so we're going to take him. So I don't care so much if he goes 20 to the Broncos and they're like, yeah, we're going to, Sutton is going to be our downfield guy and Tet's going to dominate intermediate stuff. Awesome. If he goes to the Chargers, awesome. But if he goes, to one of these weaker situations, that's where. So it's more about landing spot than the pick number, is what I'm saying. Any thoughts there? Can you hear me? Oh, we lost Daniel. All right, let's talk Luther Burden. Luther Burden, I'll just kind of set it up. Burden is seeming like to me that he's falling a bit. He was at one point kind of seen as the wide receiver 2 in the class. And now he's kind of falling, at least I want to get Daniel's thoughts on this, but it seems like he's falling more into the late first conversation or the early second round conversation. From a fantasy perspective, I think that hurts him, obviously, but he's also, in some ways, I'm like more comfortable with him with round 2 capital than I am with round 1 capital because he's kind of got a boom bust profile. And if I can get Luther Burden cheaper, if there's a perceived fall or an actual fall, I'm kind of into it because I don't think it changes the ceiling very much. But I think, but maybe the floor, like I always thought the floor was lower than people thought. And so like if the market kind of comes to me on like, hey, this guy's kind of got a lower floor than I thought, that like makes me happy because it comes with a cheaper price. So first of all, do you think Luther Burden is slipping a little bit in terms of where he might go in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, early in the process, like dating back to last summer, it seemed like Tet was the narrow favorite to be the wide receiver 1, but Burden was in that conversation and almost certainly early to mid, like top 20 potential pick. And that is absolutely not the case now. And while I think he still can go top 20, it's more back half of the first round into the second round as the like 5th to 95th range, which is concerning given the pedigree he had coming out and after his first 2 years at Missouri. The early second round draft capital spots, like those teams, I mean, if he goes to the Patriots, you're raising him a few rounds in the ranks, I think. So there's that. But like the Raiders still need a wide receiver potentially. So that wouldn't be the worst case. But like there are some danger spots, I think, whereas like with Tet, we're more concerned if he were to go late in the first round to those spots. That feels kind of nice for Burden in terms of the range of outcomes, though the price would certainly become richer. Whereas if he went in the second, because I think his price currently isn't baking in fully the risk that he is a second round pick and probably an early second round pick at that. But I think he's still a target now. If he were to fall in ADP for the draft range that we have in mind, we would become further burden bulls in the aggregate If you went to the
Yeah.
Patriots, you can be extremely confident the ranks will develop a
I'm just
very
getting out in front of this by saying I like Burden as a as a high ceiling prospect as long as I don't have to pay a ton for him.
yeah.
But of course, then he goes to the Patriots and he ends up being a 6th round pick, and I'll probably be in. But he does seem, you know, he's a 3-year guy. He broke out. He was an awesome recruit. There's some weird stuff that happened with the Missouri offense this past year. The reason that I'm nervous is that it seems like maybe a little bit more like gadgety manufactured touches type of stuff where you got to get the ball in his hands. He's awesome yak guy. We just got to get the ball in his hands. That's like, you hear that a lot about busts, it's like, hey, kind of the whole point of wide receivers in a lot of offenses is that they can get the ball into their own hands by getting open. And if you have to get the ball into his hands, that's kind of defeating the purpose of him running routes. So that definitely makes me nervous. But it's also like, could he be like a DJ Moore type of guy? I think the ceiling is there for him. This profile is one that looks kind of similar to DJ Moore's in some ways, And so, yeah, he's getting used on some screen stuff and some design stuff, but he also is getting open downfield and able to add after the catch downfield. He could end up being like a little Brandon Ayuki where he's able, it's yak, but it starts downfield, which is always really fun. So, wide range of outcomes player. And for that reason, I'm like, I think I'm going to end up having more of him if he goes 2nd round, because I think people will see the range is a little wider then. Maybe they'll see the range is a little tilted to the downside.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be it, though. I mean, if you went late round 1, just like Moore, who went like 24th, and Ayuku went 25th or 26th, that would be pretty reassuring as well. So I think he's a good pick now. Might become a stronger pick if the fall isn't too great or the market just overreacts. But I mean, the class is fun. Last year, I mean, what was the main conversation besides the quarterbacks last year? Yeah.
Well, it wasn't about the running backs.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, will Neighbors go, or Joe Alt, or Rome Odunze. There was the obligatory Rome Odunze is actually the wide receiver 1 in the class stuff.
Yeah.
Brian
there
Thomas,
were a lot of
where's he going to go?
There were a lot of early draft conversations, but here it's way more of that end of round 1. Like, could a 3rd running back sneak in? Does Jackson Dart rise to the late 1st? Does Shedeur Sanders fall to the mid to late 1st? And then what wide receivers potentially go? Like, Golden's now cemented himself in round 1. How early does he go? Can he unseat Tet for wide receiver 1? Does Burden stay in round 1? Does another wideout sneak in? I think there are a lot of fun conversations, and like hopefully some nuggets drop from folks in the know in the next month to then get us to like be more confident in how the draft shakes up. Because like even now the first pick, undecided, though very leaning Ward, but then conversations at 2, how high does Travis Hunter go? Is Travis Hunter a wide receiver? It's like one of the most fun conversations the best ball communities had about rookies for years.
The NFL communities had. I mean, we got a guy who no one knows what position he plays. So it's pretty good. Burden, or not Burden, we talked about him. Egbuka. Where do you think he goes? I've started to hear stuff where it's like, oh, he's a slot. Like what's the point? Give me Jaden Higgins because he's actually an outside wide receiver, that kind of thing. Yeah, but I mean, I'm still pretty in on Egbuka and feel like he should be a 1st rounder. But is there a chance he falls out of the 1st round?
Yeah, but acting as if he's a 20-something, early 30s pick. Like maybe he goes ahead of 20. So I think that's unlikely because when we think about the teams in those teens picks, it's very much they might take Tet if he falls, if they just think the player is graded so highly. We're not getting a lot of that on Egbuka of this is a top 10 player in the class. But then you get into the 20s, there's some wide receiver needier teams, and that seems more like his range. Maybe he's an early 2nd round pick, but like after pick 40, I'd be quite surprised if he's there. So that wouldn't work me that much.
That makes sense. And then, there is this other group kind of behind those. So to begin the process is like Tet, Burden, Egbuka are seen as like the 1st rounders. Golden, Trey Harris are kind of seen as like some maybe 2nd rounders. But now Golden's a first rounder. Trey Harris feels like, is he definitely a second rounder? And it's actually another group of guys who seem to have sort of replaced him as the most likely second rounders. And it would be like Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel. Um, and then you've got Harris and like another guy who was seen originally as a second rounder in Alec Iomanor, seems to have maybe fallen a little bit too. So do you have any thoughts on like the shuffling of the receivers behind the top four that we've already talked about?
I think the Iowa State guys are gaining more steam than I would have thought. Listening to how Brugler talked about them, talked about why would a team prefer the 2v with. Brugler talked about would a team prefer going with the 2v2 of Higgins or Noel in round 2, along with their pick of non-receiver in round 1,
Yeah,
versus taking that receiver in the top of the first. So I think that I did not expect to be there with either Iowa State
me
receiver, but
neither.
early round 2 as a ceiling is, I think, firmly in play there.
I agree. What are your thoughts on Harris and on Iomanor? Like, are they still in the round two conversation? You think, or more like, I mean, Iomanor I've seen outside of top 100s now. So he was a guy originally. It seemed to be like in the top 50 conversation. He's fallen significantly. PFF still has him very high, uh, but he seems like a very wide range of outcomes player to me.
Yeah, I think those are the type of players where the downside draft capital risk is way more present. Just the lack of them being talked about in the early round 2 conversation makes me think they're far less likely to go there. No
Mm-hmm.
real shot at going round 1, I think. Like Pearsall and Ladd last year were players where we were getting those breadcrumbs that the NFL thinks highly. They crushed the combine. That we didn't really think Pearsall was live for round 1, but we thought like him, Ladd, Jalen Polk, because Polk was getting some late steam, possibly a
Mm-hmm.
49ers connection of these are players the NFL thinks highly of. We still have another month to go, so a lot will change, but I am currently not as confident as I am in those guys in iManner's draft capital eval and Trey Harris's compared to the Iowa State players.
Any other kind of steam or fallers that you see at the wide receiver position?
Nothing at wide receiver that's jumping out. I think quarterback still the most interesting nugget. I think Sanders' range is wider and more tilted to the downside in terms of draft capital. I think Ward's not a lock to start week 1, like the way Brugler was talking about, even with Tennessee, of they might want to bring him along more
Oh my
slowly. So
god!
my read was like,
Talk about a way to
my
get
read
yourself
was that,
fired. Play Will Levis over Cam Ward. See how that goes.
but if you do that for a few weeks, then you start Ward, and then Ward comes on strong
Do
at
that
the
for a few
end.
weeks. An entire state is extremely angry with you and wants your head. Great job.
But the way it seems that Ward is viewed by teams is that he is not a ready-made week 1 product.
Mm, then
And
don't
again,
take him. This is because you're starting in week 1, or everyone will hate you. That's your choices. You're not playing Will Levis over
yeah,
this guy with a fan base who's going to take it well. That's just how it goes.
yeah, but like those are the main nuggets that are still trying to piece together at the beginning of the
God.
draft. But
Yeah.
we will see. It's a fun cycle this year. Would
Yeah.
love
Tommy
for draft.
DeVito starting over Cam Ward after they trade up for him. Definitely not going to make people furious. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
that would be. I don't think that's in play. I think if the Giants trade up, he's the week 1 starter. I think with the Titans, there's a non-zero chance that he's
God.
the week 0 or week 1 bench.
Tight end, real quick. Let me ask you just the do you have any pushback on the framing? It seems to be consensus now that it's like Warren, Colston, clear tier one, pretty close together. Mason Taylor Arroyo, clear tier two, maybe not in that order, close together. And then like maybe Harold Fannin is tier three, but like might be, would you be shocked to see like Terrence Ferguson come off ahead of him?
No,
It seemed,
the
yeah.
the fan and
So
draft capital is super fragile at this point. It's a tougher click than it was like
yeah,
when we were a little more confident pre-combine. I think that like the Loveland, I think his ADP is probably the worst of the group, where we are super confident on the range of draft capital as we are with Warren. I don't really get the ADP discrepancy still. I think our ranks reflect that. And then
we're bullish. We're bullish on him. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
I like Arroyo and Taylor. Happy with where the ranks have him. And that's really it. I think the tight end class is probably the most straightforward of the bunch right now.
So two of my favorite players is just prospects in the class, Devin Neal and Harold Fannin. You're telling me are going to be day 3 picks?
I don't think deep day 3. That's putting words in my mouth. I think that Fannin's could be still around 3 pick. I think it's more likely Fannin's around 3 pick than Devin Neal, but I reserve the right to change that opinion with new information. But I think the downsides for both those guys, like we're looking at around.
You're saying they're both going to be UDFAs. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. You can just like, put that in a big headline.
It's the pull quote. All right, I think that covers the class. I mean, is there anything like with the non top 3 quarter? Well, let me ask you just real quick about the rest of the quarterback class. We talked about Shador's range. We didn't really talk about Dart's range. Do you think he's locked in for round 1?
No, I think it's decently more likely than not, which I didn't think a month ago. But I still think like maybe early round 2 if those teams like a Will Levis range of just the first pick in round 2, so something like that with the Browns and Giants if they like him. But then Shuck, I think, tiny bit skeptical on the early round 2 love, but would not surprise me in the slightest. I think that's more the ceiling. But day 2, I want Milroe to go to a team that like has fun plans for him, whether that's like a ton of design touches because he's not a 1-of-1 athlete at the position, but very damn close to the best we're seeing at like a smaller, more compact size, like a turbo Justin Fieldsy player. That hope he goes day 2 to just like as a fan.
I do too. That'd be fun.
I like the idea. Yeah. The idea of the Colts taking him. Just like
the Colts taking him would be hilarious. Like,
like
they're just
get each quarterback on the Colts like 8 carries a game, see what happens. And with Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah. And then you have Daniel Jones can come in and miss someone downfield, but it's a better ball than Richardson would have thrown. And then that pretty much covers it. The Milroe I would like to see day 2 too. I mean, he's like probably Malik Willis and probably just like a fun backup type.
He's a much better athlete than Malik.
Yeah, that's fair. But man, the mistakes and everything, and he's got a great arm, but it's more about the ability to move a ball many yards downfield than accuracy, unfortunately. All right. I think that'll do it for this podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. Check out Legendary Upside. We've got some good content rolling out over there. Michael Dubner just had an article on the anatomy of a rookie riser, starting with quarterback, looking at what we can expect. If we're trying to predict where these prices might be after the draft for the rookie quarterbacks in best ball. He's going to dive into the other positions as well. I've got my rookie coverage of the prospects rolling out. Matt Irby's going to have an article out soon as well. And we'll be back here again for some more podcast content very soon. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you for watching. Later.